Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to talk about film. And this week, we're not talking about one film, we're talking about two. That's right, we're going to be reviewing both Midsommar as well as Crawl, two horror question mark movies that have been getting a lot of buzz lately. That's going to be an interesting discussion. I'm anxious to hear what my co-host's thoughts on that question are. But before we can solicit their thoughts, I should probably introduce them because they're pretty big deals, at least to me. So Jim Pugliafco is here with us. Welcome, Jim. How are you, babe?
I'm fine, thanks, babe, and welcome to the podcast, everybody.
Glad to have you with us, sweetheart. And Will Lindis is here too. Will, I am super jazzed that you are here with us this week too. How's it going?
Hey, I'm super jazzed to be here. I'm super jazzed to be anywhere, any week. But yeah, this is going to be a good conversation. It's going to be a quick one too. Both are absolutely horror movies.
Indeed. And okay, well, I mean,
we'll have that discussion.
But good to know that that's your thinking there. We've got a lot to talk about in this week's episode. Two big movies to discuss. I'm definitely excited to jump into these conversations. Just a couple of things. One, if you're listening live, don't forget to say hello in our live chat. If you want to share your thoughts on either Midsommar or Crawl, we would love to hear those thoughts. Not to worry though, if you haven't seen either film, if you're not familiar with our format, we do it up spoiler free for probably 10 minutes or so for each movie at the beginning. And then we give you a fair warning so you can step away if needed. If you're listening through the magic of digital tape delay via iTunes or Spotify, you can use the time index in the show notes to kind of skip around as needed. Jim does a pretty good job of giving you some anchor points in the time index to move around. So
I try, and I hope it helps.
I think it does. I mean, I listen. Yeah. When I listen to other podcasts that do the same thing, I know a lot of people like the banter up front, but when I listen to a movie review show, I just want to hear the fucking movie review. So I'm like, skip, boom, there it is.
But our listeners don't, because we like our banter too.
Yeah.
What I love about podcasts is they're choose your own adventure. You know what I mean? Like you can do with them what you want to do with them. It's all good. It's all valid, I think.
Not only that, but like if you have like a spoiler tag that you can jump to, sometimes when I've already seen the movie, of course, and their upfront discussion is kind of going on and on and on. I just want to know like who liked the movie, and then to skip past all that stuff, we're like right to the spoiler talk sometimes. So
or sometimes you haven't seen like we've got a double feature tonight, so maybe someone hasn't seen the first one, or maybe isn't interested in the first one, but it's super into the second one. They can go where they want to go.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
that's right. Turn to page 49 to hear our Crawl review. Mm-hmm. Except you wouldn't really turn a page to hear something unless, I mean, I don't know, whatever. Doesn't fucking matter.
That's not how audiobooks work, Brad.
Turn to page. Anyway. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Horror movies don't get enough love in general, but especially on podcasts for some reason, they just don't. So I'm excited to have an episode dedicated to two films that may classify as horror, possibly. Will counts them. We'll see what Jim and I maybe think, but either way, it's going to be a good discussion. So, Jim, Will, Midsommar is up first, followed by Crawl. Are we ready to do this thing?
Yes, we are.
Uh-huh.
All right. Well, then here we go. Our review of Midsommar. All right. So if you're watching the show on YouTube rather than just listening, you may be wondering why we may be wearing floral wreaths and fronds on our head and in our hair. It is an homage to Midsommar. And Will, maybe you can tell us a little bit about this film, why so many people on the internet are like honoring this film by wearing this kind of stuff. And was this a good movie for you? Like worth seeing in theaters, rentals, skip it? Spoiler free, of course.
Absolutely. So Midsommar is the new horror flick by A24, directed and written by Ari Aster, who gave us last year's exemplary Hereditary. This movie is, I guess I'll do the IMDb description just to make it nice and easy to start with. Description reads, a couple travels to Sweden to visit a rural hometown's fabled Midsummer Festival. What begins as an idyllic retreat quickly devolves into an increasingly violent and bizarre competition at the hands of a pagan cult. So I'll answer the first question, the last question you asked first, and that is, you know, should you see it in theaters? Should you rent it? Absolutely go see this movie in theaters. I'm not convinced that this is the best movie that I've seen this year, but I'm not convinced that it's not. This is like, I have my rolling top 10, and there's two films that are kind of in the 1 and 2 spot that keep bouncing back and forth, and this is one of them. What I love so much about this is that it follows sort of Ari Aster's way of writing horror films as explorations of the human condition. You know, sometimes horror films are just man versus beast. Sometimes they are just man versus man, and that's okay. That's there's something to be said about the human condition in there too. But Ari Aster likes to explore the way emotions take us over and consume us and morph us into something else. There is definitely an element of, and I'll talk briefly about this, and then we'll get into the big part of it later when the spoilers. But you know, he's really following like the way someone internalizes tragedy and the way that it impacts them as they go about their day and go about their business. It's also about something else, but the summation of what this film is about is in the spoiler section. But I love that this movie pulls horror into the light, into the overexposed bright light. It's not lurking in the shadows. It's not lurking behind the corner. It doesn't go bump in the night. Everything here is overexposed, bright, just saturated with so much light. And I think because of that, there's like a bluntness to the horror here. There's no place for anything to hide, and yet still the characters find themselves struggling with how to respond to what's going on around them, and ending up making sometimes great decisions, sometimes, you know, as happens in these movies, not great decisions. But it all is out there on the surface. It is all out there in the sunlight. There's some incredibly effective sequences. All of the performances are great. Last year, I was all about like Toni Collette, just like, yes, 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 throw all the statues at her. This year, and that was in Ari Aster's last film, Hereditary. This year, I think Florence Pugh is in that same boat for me. I think she does so much here. She has to carry so much of this film on her shoulders, and she does. She does so exquisitely. The shot composition is beautiful. The score is so good. Everything works for me. This is an absolute like slam dunk of a movie.
Oh, I think Will liked it, Brad. What do you think?
Seems like that might be the case.
I know I'm mincing my words a little bit, but
yeah.
All right. This is a big win from Will. Jim, how about for you?
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect of this film. The buzz on this in, you know, the film Twitter sphere, which I kind of dabble in a little bit, was pretty off the charts. Of course, Ari Aster, the director here and writer, I think, was, of course, last year with Hereditary, kind of knocked us through a loop with that movie and the things that happened in that movie. And I think we all were generally positive on Hereditary last year, although, you know, maybe there were some things mixed in. This one I really liked. I liked what he was trying to do. Will, you talk about what the movie's about? And I want to explore that later a little bit more with you, because I'm not so sure. It was hard for me to know if the movie really was about, there were themes presented in the movie. I just don't know if how those themes were kind of carried out in the screenplay. They were definitely there on display, but how they factored into what happened in the story is it's an interesting. It was a very interesting story in terms of like the things that happened. It was kind of a bad, I guess, for these two people who go on this vacation to this festival, and these aren't spoilers yet. It was kind of bad timing, I think, for these people to do this thing. But I like what the director did here. There were some sequences in here that were just like off the charts, like freaking crazy. Like you're studying the screen. It's one of those movies where you're like studying the screen to see what the hell is going on. And then and if you look in a certain place that's like not where the action is, you can see different things happening. And so visually, I thought this was fantastic. Will, you mentioned that how this is a movie, the rare horror movie that's actually shot in broad daylight for like 95 to 90, 90 to 95% of it. So, and that was a little bit unsettling because we're not used to seeing that. And we'll talk about some of the other things that happened, but I did like the performance of, Florence Pugh. I thought she was very good. I thought the supporting cast was also great. We'll talk about some of the characters in this movie when we get into spoilers, because there's some character motivations here that I think have to be explored if you want to know what this movie really about anything other than what we saw on the screen, or what, let's get into that a little bit. But I liked it. I liked it quite a bit. I was surprised by it, which I always take away as a positive from a movie. If the movie surprises me in a way, that in some of the ways this movie did, and it made me kind of feel uneasy at times, horrified at other times, I think it did its job. So I'm positive on this one.
Sounds like another win from Jim. Before I get into my thoughts, just want to give some quick shout outs from the chat. We've got a bunch of folks who are joining us. James is here from Austin. We've got Bruce. We've got Adrian Charlie from Green Screen of Death. Hey, Adrian, welcome. Glad to have you here. JP Wendell is here with us. We're getting a full Movie Bears podcast crew going in the chat tonight. So glad to see you all. Welcome. Looks like folks are starting to share some of their thoughts already. Keep them coming, folks. But as for me, it's interesting. Hereditary came up, and I liked Hereditary. Jim, you're right. I mean, I was, I think along with you guys, kind of positive on the film. I think I liked it the least, though, out of the three of us. It didn't really wow me. I mean, it was fine. I enjoyed it, but it didn't really do much different. And so going into Midsommar, I was kind of dreading it. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm like, oh, great. Here we go. Another overhyped fucking movie from this person. I'm like, really? Do I have to watch a 2.5 hour fucking horror film from this person? But I actually ended up enjoying it quite a bit. I liked it a lot more than Hereditary. And we'll talk about some reasons why, especially when we get into spoilers. Jim, you mentioned a lot of the cool visual things that were happening. I felt like I was on drugs through a lot of the movie. And
yeah,
that was interesting to me because I'm like, wait a second, what's going on here? There's sort of this like ethereal quality throughout the whole film that I find really, really interesting. We'll get into some specifics a little bit later. From a cast perspective, I mean, a lot of good cast action here. Florence Pugh, I thought, was fantastic as the lead, Danny. She was great. Jim, you're laughing at my pun. I'm not giving anything away. But I really want to focus on Jack Reynor for a second, who plays sort of the male romantic lead, the boyfriend of this couple. I've had a crush on him ever since he was in Sing Street a few years ago, which we saw at South by Southwest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And man, I just thought he was so hot. Long hair typically doesn't do it for me, but like it was doing it for me in that movie. And so I've kind of been following his career since then. We've seen him in a few other things. He had a lot to do in this movie, and yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that for now, but I really, really enjoyed seeing him in this film.
And some of the things he did, you really appreciated, right?
I did. I totally did. So, I mean, I could reiterate what you have said, and Jim, what you have said, but rather than do that, I'm going to bank that time for spoilers, and just read a comment that I got from somebody on Facebook after I posted that we had seen this movie. I had called it a horror film when talking about it on Facebook. And this person messaged me and said, "Hey, Brad, it's not a horror movie. The director of Midsommar calls it a breakup movie and a fairy tale, especially since it's all during the day and has the fever dream quality. It's not your equation for the label of a horror movie." Well, first of all, there are things that happen at night. It's not completely missing the things that go bump in the night thing. I mean, there's some of that. Jim, you quoted like 95% or something is in the daylight. That's true. There is some nighttime stuff. But I wanted to ask you guys, I mean, Will, I know you said up front, yes, it's a horror movie, but like, does this really qualify? I mean, if the director supposedly is saying it's a fairy tale and a breakup movie, not a horror movie, does that change your viewpoint at all?
Okay, so genre is a very complicated thing. When we talk about genre, we're talking about conversational shorthand that we use to classify things.
Categorize.
Yeah. So when we actually think about what is a rom-com, there isn't like a hard and fast set of rules. We generally look at a rom-com and say that's a rom-com because we know what a rom-com feels like. That's how genre works. It's a fuzzy-edged thing that's used to help conversational shorthand. In the case of Midsommar, it is absolutely a horror film. It's absolutely other things as well because genre is not exclusive. But breaking down a couple of those points, the fact that it's mostly during the day, well, I mean, there's obviously the Wicker Man film that is the biggest comparison that you would draw there. But if you look back at the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the majority of the first several of those kills happen during the day. And I think it's pretty easy for us to say that Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a horror film, right? So the presence of sunlight or absence of sunlight does not a horror film make. What makes a horror film to me is, does it have some sort of terrifying element, some sort of suspense, some sort of someone's life is at stake, someone's safety is on the line? Is it the type of thing that goes bump in the night, even if it's not at night? I think all of those things work. I think that Ari Aster, I respect the hell out of the dude because he does make the types of films that I want to see over and over and over again. But I think there's sometimes a stigma that comes with horror films, that they're kind of like
slashers.
They're like air quotes trash films. They're not good movies or whatever. And I can see why someone might try to distance themselves from that because what he's made in addition to everything else, he's made an art house film, and he's definitely trying to market it as such unless it's a horror film. But the thing is that a film can be both, and Midsommar absolutely is. So yeah, for every reason possible, this is a horror film.
So and I agree, Will. I think he's playing in the sandbox of horror. He's definitely got some horrific stuff that happens in this movie that would happen in any other, that could happen in any other horror movie. I mean, people get burned alive. People get flayed and hung up by the ceiling. Limbs are chopped off people. Heads get smashed in with mallets. People fall from,
So we'll be careful, right? Of spoilers.
Oh, we're not there yet. Come on.
No.
Yeah, we're in the pre-spoilers still.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I might have to cut that out. But stuff happens. Stuff happens in this movie that there's no doubt that he's playing in the sandbox of horror. Now, yes, you can call it other things. Call it a fucked up fairy tale if you want. It certainly might fall into that category. A fucked up romance movie, a relationship movie. It's definitely that. It's a lot of things, but I think to me, in terms of genre, this definitely fits in the horror genre.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree for all the reasons you guys already mentioned. I mean, this seems like a straight up horror movie to me. Yes, you could probably lean on the suspense angle and call it a suspense film, but I don't know. It's at least to me, it feels like a horror film. So sounds like all three of us are kind of aligned on that. We're comfortable putting the horror stamp on it. And It's interesting. Adrian makes a great point in the chat. He says director intent is one thing, but it's out of their hands once it's out there. So even if Ari Aster didn't intend this to be a horror movie, which I honestly find hard to believe given.
Yeah, I don't think he said it's not a horror movie. He just said, here's what else it might be.
Right. But I mean, that's definitely a good point.
Yeah, there's this really fat. It's interesting that this conversation came up exactly today because it's. I just watched a couple days ago a fascinating video by a YouTuber who goes by Innuendo Studios, and he does a lot of sort of philosophical deep dive stuff. And he did one recently on genre, specifically talking about video games. He was, what is an adventure game, what isn't an adventure game. And the more and more I was kind of doing some digging in after watching that, kind of reading up on some different people that have written on it, because it's a super deep well. I've really come to the conclusion that genre is more of a, it when you see it type thing. And that any attempt to try to put too firm a sandbox around it just becomes too restrictive for actual conversational use. I think just saying does this feel like a horror film? And I think all three of us would say, yeah, this totally feels like a horror film. I think that's proof in the pudding enough.
But it's also fair to say that not everybody has the same opinion. And, if you don't feel like it's a horror movie, that's completely okay too. But I mean, I don't know. Mileage varies. There's room for all opinions under the sun. But for us, at least, this seems pretty horror-y. Yeah, we're going to make that
somebody, Splanny in chat said, definitely. He says psychological horror. He'd put it up there kind of in a category with Mother or Annihilation, which is another one. And I'd agree with both of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Spawny, definitely a great point. Well, guys, I think there's some things we need to talk about with this movie that we can't talk about in the non-spoiler section. So we're going to go ahead and make that transition. If you have not yet seen Midsommar and you don't want to be spoiled on the plot, this is the part where I awkwardly ramble for your benefit. If you're listening live, feel free to mute us. Come on back in about 15 minutes. Rejoin us for our discussion of Crawl. Or if you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, just use the time index in the show notes. Go ahead and skip ahead forward if you like. But guys, spoilers are indeed fair game. Where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with what is this movie about? I think there's a lot of themes explored here. There's a relationship movie going on between Danny's character, the lead female character, and Christian, I think it is, Jack Rayner's character. Their relationship is not on the best grounds, I guess we could say, and that's established pretty early up front in the movie. It seems like they've had a relationship for a while. Maybe the relationship's going stale. They're questioning their their commitment and love for one another going into this. So they decide to take a Swedish vacation. Also, a lot of people have talked about so that's one theme that maybe we could talk about in the movie. Another one is grief. There's grief. So in terms of the main character, she has gone through kind of a horrific family tragedy. Right at the beginning, her family has basically committed suicide, her sister and parents, in one kind of horrific incident, which may be probably the most horrific thing in the whole movie. If you think about it, the way that was played out was just incredibly horrifying in the movie. And so we have all that in the mix. Now, was the movie about, kind of an exploration of that, or was it just that's what happened while she was, I'm struggling with that, right? I'm struggling with how does the movie explore that really? And that's what maybe we can talk about a little bit.
Yeah, I think that it's important to look at. Okay, so first of all, you've hit on two of the emotional core beats of the film, right? You know, you have the grief that she's experienced and the fact that she's bottled it in and she doesn't have an outlet for it. And then you have what I would say is the full theme of the film, and is that this is a movie about the ending of a toxic relationship. This is the movie about someone who in a more healthy relationship, would have had an outlet for her grief, would have had someone that she could have talked to, would have had someone that wouldn't have dismissed her thoughts, that would have supported her and helped pull those emotions out of her instead of acting like she was an inconvenience. But that is how he treated her. And so she had to bottle up and internalize and make this thing fester away at herself. So the grief is not the theme of the film as much as it's really the sort of the litmus test as to where Florence Pugh's character in this, what's her name again?
Danny.
Yeah, where Danny is, kind of where she's at emotionally right now. As we get through the film and as she develops community, and granted, it's a fucked up community. There's a lot of pretty terrible things going on in this film, but the one thing that she's able to get from it is the support and the structure and the ability to lean on others and them to feel her pain and to let her pain be something that is legitimized and put out into the world, as opposed to something that she should, tuck away inside of her. So as she goes through this pretty brutal breakup, she finds herself and she finds community and she finds maybe not necessarily an escape from her grief, but she at least finds a way to channel it.
She finds her murderous self.
Well,
I think she finds community.
I think it's not just grief, though. I think it's anger and helplessness. Like, I think it starts right with her sister deciding to kill herself, but not only take herself out, but in her note, she's like, Mom and Dad are coming on the trip too. And like, at least to me, it seems like she orchestrated their death, right? Like, she ran the hose up into their room. We see it taped on the floor. They're both, obviously dead from CO2 poisoning or whatever. So there's this helplessness in terms of like, not only did the sister kill herself, but she took her parents away from her too, right? And so, Will, you're right. Not having an outlet in the form of her boyfriend or whatever, like there's nowhere for that anger to go, and that helplessness, I think, that she feels just sort of gets compounded and compounded and compounded. And so at the end of the film, not to jump to the end too quick, but I guess we will, she has a choice. Like, does she kill the guy who's not an outlet for her, or some other random Swedish dude who's part of this new family or this new community? And she chooses to kill the guy that wasn't there for her. And I mean, man, that's an excruciating decision you probably had to make. But
yeah, it was brutal. I mean,
the
dude was not a great dude, right? I mean, he had his issues. I think he was probably maybe thinking about checking out of the relationship. I don't know if he supported her very well at that point in the relationship, but I don't know if anything he did specifically. He was kind of a shady dude, right? It showed with the thing where he tried to like steal the guy's thesis, right? And he claimed that, oh yeah, I could do the same thing. We'll just split it. So that gave you an insight into his character. But I don't know that it was weird that it came to her choosing to kill the guy. But obviously she was influenced by drugs, hallucinogens, or God knows, mood altering drugs, whatever. And it's unclear, as far as, to me at least, how much that played a role in the way it went down for her. Because you don't know how much of her decisions were actually hers, certainly in a present state of mind or not. So it's not really clear. And I think the movie maybe muddles its image by doing that with the drugs. I don't think it makes it stronger.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is that you can't take authorial intent at face value, but you do have to consider it to some degree. And if we know that Ari Aster was setting out to make a fairy tale film on top of everything else, which I think is a very apt description, this is both a horror film and a fairy tale. A lot of fairy tales end up with sort of dramatic karmic justice for perceived or actual slights, right? Like, if you are cruel, if you're a mean stepmother who makes your stepdaughter do chores when she shouldn't, you're gonna have your eyes pecked out by crows. And when you look at that on paper, like, does anyone deserve to have their eyes pecked out by crows? Probably not. But in the world of a fairy tale, these types of slights are are what give you your karmic reward. And I think that's what this film is setting up here too. I don't think that if you actually asked Ari Aster, like, hey, do you think you should like burn alive like everyone that's ever been a shitty boyfriend? I don't think he would say yes. But I think within the fiction of this story, that's where things escalated to.
But was it really her taking those actions, or was she being guided by two stronger influences on her besides her own will? One, hallucinogens, and two, kind of this group pressure thing that was happening to her. So, it's hard to say, oh, she was, she had to take this course because, she was treated so badly and all that stuff. But in essence, I don't know how much she took of that course, certainly rationally. So
right, and I see where you're coming from there, because like at the end of the movie when she's up on the stage, right, she's the May Queen now. She's totally like enveloped in all these flowers. It's almost like she's like a flower statue, and her head and face are just kind of peeking out of it. Her eyes are huge. We see like the flowers and stuff on top of her headdress, like opening and closing with these weird like Freddy Krueger like arm syringe mouths that keep opening, and like everything is like ethereal and just sort of messed up. And I think it kind of denotes her mental state. And Bruce in the chat mentioned something I think that feeds in. He says, I think it was the emotional symbiosis that she was getting from the cult, right? And in that moment, yeah, the drugs are messing with her mind, I'm sure, right? They're making her emotions come to the surface. Maybe she's not even fully cognizant that she's making a decision to kill this guy. I mean, we don't know. But yeah, I mean, if I were in that position, right, and it's making me sort of question whether I go with this new family who's embraced me and loved me so much within the span of a few days, or this asshole, no matter how fucking hot he is, who treats me bad, right? I would think if you're that high and you're that wrapped up in the emotional wave of things, I mean, it might, I don't know. It might be understandable.
That's absolutely right, Brad, because I think the film isn't necessarily saying that what she did was ultimately like the
of her own free will.
Well, yeah. I think it's saying that it wasn't a noble action. The film isn't necessarily like deifying kind of what she did, but I think what it's saying is what it's doing is it's in the moment and in her emotional state, it's justifying what she did, at least in her own mind. She has this emotional symbiosis that when she is experiencing grief and she collapses to the floor of the cabin or the house, whatever it is, and all of the women lurch around her and feel her pain with her. That's something that she hasn't experienced in some time, because we know that she hasn't been getting it from from Christian. She hasn't been getting it from her family because
they're dead.
They're dead. And we can even surmise that even before that she's had, some anxiety, and also, she was taking pills, earlier in the film. And we know that she has a kind of this weird strained relationship with the sister to begin with. Christian says, oh, she does this all the time. She doesn't mean this. So she probably didn't even have a good outlet with her family to deal with. But now all of a sudden she has that. And yeah, there's drugs involved. I think the film would argue that what they did was just sort of let her sort of open herself up to the experience and sort of make the decision that she needed to make. And of course, I think that's where the true horror of this lies. Right. I think when we look at a situation where somebody is in such a state where they have no emotional hooks with other people, no outlet, no way to express themselves, no way to just unburden all of this shit that's stacked up on her, except for joining a death cult in Sweden. Like there's
a murder cult.
Yeah. So she is, we can both like feel like fuck yeah, burn him to the ground. He's a shitty dude, but also feel very sad for her that was her only outlet to begin with.
And let's not forget too that the death cult kind of manipulated her in a way as well, and manipulated Christian,
Absolutely.
right? Because they got Christian to fuck Maya or whatever her name was in that ceremony. And by the way, really great seeing Jack Rayner full frontal, half hard. That was amazing. Not so much the old woman pushing on his butt as he was thrusting into Maya. That wasn't so great. But I mean, they kind of, you know, manipulate.
Don't see that too often in movies, though.
You don't. But they kind of manipulate, you know, Christian too into, you know, fulfilling a role. And even though the women of the death cult, like when Danny was like going to go to the barn and see what's going on, they're like, well, that's not for you. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Come on, she's the fucking May Queen. You know she's going to do it. And so I think seeing Christian fucking some other woman, you know, at the same time she's dealing with all this grief and all this fucked up shit is happening. I mean, it just pushes it to a level that I think you can't come back from.
Right. And I think that was that might have been the straw. You know what I mean? That whole episode was kind of the straw with Christian and the Maya girl, and that was building up. And you know, there's a pubic hair in the pie, and which I totally misinterpreted initially, and I'll get to that in a minute. But like, and then him with the hallucinogenic tea or whatever, and being kind of seduced, and who knows how much of his own free will he was under during that sequence. And then of course them kind of mourning along with her when she sees the scene and she kind of freaks out. They all freak out with her to kind of elevate the feelings, I guess. So it was both of them were being manipulated from the get-go, right? Probably before they even got to Sweden, right? From Pele, they were all being manipulated, which makes that character pretty awesome. Like the way they built that character, I thought was great, because he seems like such a sweet guy. He's got a sweet face. He's handsome. He's very friendly, but he's basically leading them to their deaths. We don't know if the May Queens survive. For all we know, the May Queens are sacrificed as well. There was a whole wall of pictures of May Queens. They never even really explained what happens to the May Queens. For all we know, they get burned the next day. The movie doesn't go into that, but just a really, I mean, Ari Aster likes his cults. Apparently, he ended and mild spoilers for Hereditary.
We're talking thematic links between.
Yeah, he goes full like demonic pagan cult, kind of 3/4 of the way to the end of that movie as well. So,
and he really enjoys showing elderly women with crusty vaginas
and burning people alive. Don't forget that one.
Oh, can't forget that one.
Yeah,
he's developing a
pattern. There's a pattern here.
And if this is what we get, if this is the pattern that he's forming, like. So I know we all came down a little positive on Hereditary. Like there is a super strong chance that both Hereditary and Midsommar in back-to-back years are top 5 films of the year for me. For a filmmaker who's sort of just coming out the gate, that is impressive as hell. A guy whose like name wasn't even on my lips like 2 years ago is becoming like I will drop what I'm doing and see the new film by this filmmaker, that type of director. So if he's developing a film language, if he's developing a style, if we're going to see more cults and people being burned alive and whatever, fuck it, I'm on board. I'll see as many of these as he can keep making, as long as they're of this quality.
It makes me think of that meme where you see the dog sitting at the table with like the room on fire around him, and he's like, this is fine. You know, if Ari Aster's films are just, you know, people on fire dying, this is fine.
I call that me watching the news every morning.
Damage report. That's the question I ask myself every morning when I fire up my news app. Anyway. Well, guys, final thoughts on, I almost said Hereditary. Final thoughts on Midsommar before we move over to Crawl.
The poor bear. That's all I'm going to say. Aww. The bear had to live in a fucking cage that was barely bigger than my couch. And then at the end, he gets slaughtered just so he can be stuffed with Christian and set alight.
Speaking of that bear, I want to share a quick little story about one of our one of our listeners in live chat right now. Rustemeyer and I were both super excited about getting A24 released 75 of these little bears in a cage. And they were like a plastic bear with like a garland around it and a wooden cage. And they ended up like there was some shopping cart stuff that happened. And then they didn't kind of announce when they went on sale. And so like 75 people apparently got them, but none of the people that I know got them, which sucks. So he goes and does the most amazing thing. And I'll share the video with you later, guys. But he's like, you know what? I think I can make this. And so he got the materials and he made a damn good replica of this thing that is now on like eBay for like, like people are selling their things for like $500 on eBay because that's what people do when they purchase things nowadays.
$572.24 is what the one I'm looking at is up to right now.
Yep.
I was going to look for your birthday, Will. If it was like less than 150, I was going to get it for you. I'm sorry.
I mean, I would have loved that, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those like shit, like it went away. But I will share the video. He made a video of himself. He and his son, made it as sort of a project for the two of them, and it's a damn near replica of it.
That's awesome.
So, nice.
Kudos, Bruce, for that. It's super impressive.
Can't wait to see that, Bruce, for sure. All right. Well, if you're looking for a good horror movie, because it is a horror movie, that's what we're saying. That's our opinion, at least. I think Midsommar definitely qualifies. I'm looking forward. I never thought I'd say this after Hereditary, but I'm looking forward to the next movie from Ari Aster. Some really good stuff coming out of that. I will say, though, if I was ever contemplating taking magic mushrooms while camping or something before, I'm not now. Just FYI.
You're hard pass.
That's a hard pass from me.
I mean, here's the thing. I don't think you would have to worry if you took magic mushrooms while in a field. Jim, if you ever see Brad taking magic mushrooms, make sure that you didn't have a fight the night before. Make sure you put away your laundry. Did I do the dishes? Shit, I need to make sure that I'm just like spouse of the year right now because Brad just took some shrooms.
I'm the May Queen, batch.
I know I brought it up before, but there were some subtle things going on visually with this movie. I think, when it gets released on VOD, it'll be worth a second watch because you'll be able to pay more attention to things that are kind of off center in the screen. Like I swear, in some parts, when they were under the influence of the psychotropic drugs they were taking, like people's faces were being distorted. Like the smile would get bigger and the eyes would get big a little bit, just very slightly. You've seen that done in like the Black Hole Sun video, whatever, like kind of like that, but on a much more subtle level. And it's like suddenly you're watching Alita Battle Angel or whatever, and you're like, wait a second, what's going on? Yeah.
There was one like in her head. So when everything was morphing, there was one flower in particular. There were a lot of them.
Yep. Yes.
There was one up there that kept doing that little, and I could not take my eyes off of it. It was just visually arresting.
Yeah,
indeed. Maybe there's some symbolism about her flower opening and closing for Christian. I don't know. We could probably have a whole nother hour conversation about the symbolism of Midsommar, but we are going to go ahead and transition. We have another horror movie to talk about, and this one's fucking alligators killing people. So I'm just going to say up front, I think it's a horror movie. Jim, Will, is Crawl a horror movie?
I think it's definitely a horror movie.
Clearly so, yeah.
Without question. Okay, so we're going to jump into our discussion of the horror movie Crawl. Why are you laughing, Jim?
I'll tell you in a minute.
Okay. If you haven't seen the film yet, that's completely okay. Stick with us for the next 10 minutes. If you're curious at all about killer alligators in a Cat 5 hurricane in Florida, this movie may be for you. We'll let you know our thoughts after the drop. Here we go. Our discussion of Crawl. All right, Jim, you were laughing as we were making our transition. What's that all about?
So, if you're looking to IMDb to kind of arbitrate your arguments about which movies are horror or not, you might be sorely disappointed, because for Midsommar, it lists Midsommar as a drama, horror, mystery. For Crawl, it lists it as action, adventure, drama. Doesn't even mention horror. So one of them is a horror movie and one of them is not, but not the one you might think. It's just funny.
It's alligators killing people with jump scares.
With jump scares.
Rated R for bloody creature violence. Oh, and if you look, it only lists the first 3, but if you go down a little further,
10 of them.
Well, it lists this one as action, adventure, drama, horror, thriller, and they list them alphabetically. So it's still horror. It's just genre is weird.
Got it.
It's kind of like a Pornhub video when it has like 50 tags and blowjob is the one like way at the bottom, but that's what the video is all about. It's just like that. Yeah.
It's exactly like that. This is the horror is the blowjob of genre.
Oh goodness.
I don't know if that tracks, but
well, I gotta say, when we tag our shows, I don't always put the tags in like preference order. So
right.
So I can see how that could happen.
There you go.
They're probably in alphabetical, but
maybe. All right. So Jim, go ahead and if you don't mind, kick this one off. Give folks a little bit of the setup of Crawl. Is this worth seeing in theaters? Waiting for rentals? Skipping? Spoiler free. What are your thoughts?
So Crawl is a brand new horror movie, and it's about a young woman, while attempting to save her father during a Cat 5 hurricane in Florida, finds herself trapped in a flooding house and must fight for her life against alligators. Not just alligators, but very big alligators. This film, directed by Alexander Aja, who did, I forget what he did. He did something that we liked, or kind of liked.
Evil Dead remake.
Yeah, and he did. Do you guys remember Piranha 3D?
Yeah.
How much fun that movie was? I had a lot of fun with that movie, and he directed that movie as well.
Oh no, he didn't do Evil Dead. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So this is weird. We pivoted on this movie, right? Onto this movie. We were originally, if anybody follows the show closely, they know that last week we probably announced that we were going to do Midsommar and Stuber. But yeah, whoops. But we've seen the trailers for Crawl, and I gotta admit, when I saw the trailers in the movie theater, I'm like, oh my god, this looks like the most stupid premise for a horror movie. I know it's probably going to be terrible. And then people started seeing it and saying, hey, you know what, this movie's got something about it that's pretty damn good. So we pivoted to this one for that reason, and for the fact that it lined up better genre-wise with another horror movie than putting a comedy with Midsommar, which was a very odd combination. But this one stars Kayla Scodelario, which I don't know that actor very well. Barry Pepper, I know, which we've seen in some things before. It's basically a two-hander. There are a few other actors in this movie, but it's really about these two characters. Kayla plays the daughter Haley, and Barry Pepper plays her father Dave, who her father gets trapped in a house while he's working on it in the basement. He's injured. Hurricane is bearing down on the area. She's not able to reach her father by phone. She gets worried. She drives out and finds herself in the house, trapped, trying to get her father out. But alligators get in the way. This movie is, man, there's nothing, what do I say? There's nothing extraordinary about this movie, except it wasn't terrible. Like it's very competent. Some of the jump scares are effective. I don't think they're overused in this movie. I thought the action was pretty thrilling and mostly believable. I do think they stretch credibility a little bit in some places, but I thought Kayla's performance was really good. I just think it's a very good, straightforward, tense, scary kind of bottle episode where you're trying to figure out if these people are going to get out of the situation. alligators may be more scary to some people than to others. They're certainly dangerous. And this movie doesn't really give alligators superpowers, so that's that's going for it. I mean, these alligators don't like jump over buildings and shit and fly, so that's good. It's this, in other words, this is not a Sharknado movie. This is not like your sci-fi kind of horror movie. I thought this was pretty grounded. Think in terms of something like The Shallows or 47 Meters Down. I think this movie kind of falls right in that genre of these movies, and also right in kind of the quality level of those movies, somewhere in between those two, I think, for me. But I liked it. I would recommend people see this movie. I think it's a good, fun time for people to go out and see something that's not too, not going to make you think a lot, but you're probably going to have fun watching it. Yeah, check it out. Crawl.
All right, so that's I guess a mild recommend.
Yeah, it's a recommend for me. It's just a solid recommend for me.
All right, excellent. Well, we mentioned the Cat 5 hurricane. Before I jump into my thoughts, I just wanted to share something fun with you guys. I made this because this is what I think of for a Cat 5 hurricane.
Nice.
That only looks like a Cat 1 hurricane. He needs 4 buddies for a Cat 5 hurricane.
It's a cat hanging on to the trunk of a tree being blown away in the wind. Anyway. So, yeah, Jim, when you were like, maybe we pivot away from Stuber and do Crawl instead, I was just like, oh, God, really? From one movie that already was probably going to be fairly dumb to another one that seemed like it'd be fairly dumb. I'm just like, oh, all right. But I kind of mildly wanted to see Stuber already because I think you both saw it at South by Southwest, right? Or was it just Jim?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. Just Jim. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So I kind of wanted to see it, just, curiosity. But when we pivoted and went to Crawl instead, I was like, all right, killer alligators, hurricanes, there's going to be some cool stuff in here. Why not? And I mean, it was fine. I don't think there was anything groundbreaking here. I think this movie tried to be a little bit. What was that Fede Alvarez untitled thriller from a couple years ago? Don't Breathe. Is that what the final title? Yeah. I think this movie kind of tried to be the Don't Breathe of like alligator movies. Like instead of a blind old man in a house, like it's fucking alligators, in the crawl space underneath. But I mean, it was fine. There was some good action. There were some clever things. I use that term mildly, I guess. It didn't wow me. But I mean, if you're looking for a fun horror movie, something to maybe get your blood pumping a little bit and make you never fucking want to get in, murky water again, I would say Crawl maybe fits that bill. So that's my thinking. Mild recommend for me too, I guess. Will, how about for you?
That feels about right. I'm probably a little higher on it, but I'm not like, I mean, this is the lesser of the two films that we're reviewing this episode. Let's start there. I think what's great about Crawl is that it knows exactly what it is and it delivers exactly that, which is, Jim, you had mentioned The Shallows. I think this film exists in part and was marketed in part because of The Shallows, because it shares a lot of similar DNA. Not to say that it's derivative of, but I think that it was definitely greenlit and it was definitely like marketed as heavily as it was because of the success of that Blake Lively film. The thrills are there. You have a woman and her dad versus a bunch of alligators, and you get other people pop up from time to time, but it's like you mentioned, it's just the two of them primarily, and for what it is, it does what it does well enough. Like there are some definitely death-defying moments. There's some bone-crunching action. There's some stuff that just makes you sort of like hold your breath in suspense because of a tense moment that's happening. But at the same time, there are also a few too many moments where she kind of gets away with murder compared to like some of the other characters in the film do. And I get that that's, protagonists have plot armor and that's part of it. But at a certain point, I did start to become a little bit less terrified on her behalf because I didn't feel like anything would come of it. But it's a good film. It is a good film. It is, if we're talking baseball terms, this is definitely like a right down the middle. This is a good double. Is what this is.
Yeah, it's a ground rule double. Yeah,
it's a ground rule double.
Yeah, I think it might be a little more than that. Maybe the guy was fast and stretched it into like a sliding triple, slid under the tag. But yeah, I agree with you guys. I think, like I said, I like the fact that this movie knew what it was, went straight for it, didn't lean in to try to make laughs, which I appreciated. That a lot of these movies will throw in humor to try to, like, quote unquote, like, cut the tension or whatever. This movie didn't need it, didn't go for it, and I thought it was great. We'll talk about some of the maybe we'll get into a little bit of spoilers, and probably not long, but there were a few moments in this movie that made me stand up and take notice and go, wow, that was pretty cool. And specifically around some of the supporting characters and what happened and kind of how they set up the story. I thought the human element got a little bit melodramatic at times. And that kind of turned me off, unfortunately. Very cliched and a little overly dramatic for me. So and it didn't really land for me. So if there's one, probably my biggest takeaway would be some of the moments between father and daughter felt a little forced. So
I didn't even feel like they were father and daughter. So I mean, backed up on that.
I feel like they were forced. But I will say that, like, I've seen too many of these horror movies that did the opposite and don't give us characters that, don't try to do the character relationship. This one was, I think it was fine for me. It was clunky. The relationship was clunky, and specifically the way it manifested, there's some imagery that happens with how they escape from certain scenes, which are callback, all that stuff like that. It's very obvious and clunky, but at the same time, like, I guess I do appreciate them for trying that, as opposed to a lot of these films that don't even put that attempt in. Right. I just kind of wish they had finessed it a little more.
Yeah, definitely. And I thought, as far as the effects go, I thought they were pretty darn good for the most part. I mean, I don't know how they did the alligator stuff. I probably could do some research and find out, but I thought it looked pretty darn realistic, at least to me. Now, I've never been in a basement. I've never been trapped in a basement with a couple of giant alligators, but I thought the effects were definitely, convincing enough for me. Some of the outdoor shots look a little bit like they were done on a set kind of thing. A little bit, of the storm and the hurricane stuff, but the alligator shots I thought were pretty well done.
All right. Well, I don't know that we have much more to say from the non-spoiler perspective, and I suspect our spoiler part of the show might be kind of short too. But Jim, Will, are we ready to make that jump?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Yeah, and it probably won't be a long spoiler section.
Probably not, but we're going to give our prerequisite spoiler warning anyway. If you haven't yet seen Crawl and you value your pure and wholesome innocence where the film's plot is concerned, go ahead, step away if you're listening live for about 10 minutes. If you want to come back to hear us say goodbye. Otherwise, if you're listening live, this may be a good time for you to say goodbye in the live chat, and we'll see you next week. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to, close out the show as well. If you want to hear our theme music at the end, just skip to the last 40 seconds or so. Otherwise, you hang on like you're in a Cat 5 hurricane at your own peril. Spoilers for Crawl are officially fair game. Guys, one thing I want to talk about that I think that this movie did really well, I don't have a lot of positives to say about this movie, is the hurricane, is the weather. I really, really like the realism of this, like, hurricane situation. Like, so many times you hear these stories about these people who there's a hurricane coming. They've evacuated everybody, but lo and behold, they've stayed behind because you think, or they think that they can survive the storm somehow. And then people, are dumb enough to like drive into the storm to try and get to them. And I don't mean like, professionals. I mean like Joe Blow down the street. Oh, I'm going to go save so-and-so. And then they all die. But you know what? The cool thing is, we saw some really great weather effects. And now every time I hear someone staying in their house in a Cat 5 hurricane, I'm going to imagine it's because killer alligators have them trapped in the crawl space underneath their house. So there's that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one thing I'll say about the storm stuff is that storm surge flooding was at least 25 feet, man, because by the end of the movie, the water was up to like the roof line, right? Isn't that was where it was? And I mean, it was a 2-story house, so it had to be at least 25, 30 feet of a storm surge. And I don't know if that's realistic now that I think back on it. Even for coastal Florida, it may be. I'm going to do a little back research on that tonight before bed.
I mean, I've seen lots of pictures and video of like floodwaters like up that high on a house. I don't know that they're necessarily in Florida, but I believe it does happen.
And they did due diligence in the movie enough for me, because they did the whole like it was filling at a much more steady rate up until the actual like the levee broke, and then once that happened, that's when everything flooded in.
Now that I think of it, they did mention the levee, so it's a low-lying area anyway that was flooded by a break in the levee. But I gotta say that this movie, one thing that impressed me about this movie, for a movie that took place mostly in like a flooded basement with a bunch of alligators, this movie wasn't overly in love with its jump scares. I didn't think.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't think it leaned on cheap, gimmicky jump scares. Like with the music, like the string section, and bang, something happens. Actually, one of the most effective jump scares happened early on in the movie, where I think everybody in the theater jumped off their seat by a foot, and all it was a tree crashing through a window.
Yeah,
and it made me come off my seat, and that's because it was well timed, it was unexpected, and just well placed in the movie. It didn't even have anything to do with an alligator. Now, you in your mind, you thought, oh, there's alligators around this house, and so when the window crashed, you're who knows what you're thinking, but it was very effective.
Yeah, and when they did do jump scares, they were. I mean, I'm not one that's opposed to jump scares. I just want them to be used effectively. Like, I want them to add to tension and not be like a release valve for tension, which is what bad jump scares are. And so I remember a scene where we're in spoilers now. One of the jumps happens like when she's she knows where the one alligator is. She thinks there's only one, and then her phone lights up, and you realize it's right there. And then all of a sudden, we jump because she's jumping, because like this moment of tension just got ratcheted up. That's an effective jump scare. It built into the tension instead of pulling away from it.
Not only that, but during the jump scare, it wasn't just a cheap jump scare, meaning all it did was kind of frighten us for a second and nothing really happened either in the movie. But actually she got attacked by this thing and got really freaking mauled up by this alligator. So it was an effective jump scare in that it actually had kind of stakes in the movie. You know what I mean? It wasn't a just kind of a floating jump scare. So, I think good on the movie for doing that.
Speaking of good on the movie, I mentioned like a clever thing, that this movie did, that I kind of wanted to just chime in with real quick. Our final girl in this film is a competitive swimmer. How great that she's in a hurricane with all these floodwaters and she can like propel herself through the water. Like, a little coincidental maybe, but like it at least made it believable to me that like she would maybe be fast enough to get away from alligators in the water. Like if this was just some normal person who came to save her dad who wasn't a competitive swimmer, like there's no way you're fucking out swimming alligators. But competitive swimming, I buy it at least.
And they only use that trick one time. She only outran the alligators one time to the boat, I think. And after that, it was just normal stuff. I think so again, I think the movie was very judicious with its use of all the tools that it had at its disposal. I mentioned the the relationship between the dad and the daughter, and some of the stuff like, you're number one, you're always number one in my heart, and I only was tough on you so you'd be better. I mean, all that stuff we've heard 100 times before.
Yeah.
And I just wish the movie had found a smarter way to deal with a father, you know, an estranged, they were an estranged relationship as far as I remember, because the father had divorced the mom and was selling off the house, and maybe they hadn't seen each other for a while, but I think there's some smarter things they could have done there.
Speaking of things we've heard 100 times, Astro in the chat says, "Hey, I'm late again, you guys." Hello,
Aww.
Astro. We love you. We're just ribbing you a little bit. Whether you joined at the beginning or late in the show, we're glad to have you here.
Welcome to Crawl
Astro.
Spoilers.
Welcome to our crawl space.
Crawl space.
That sounds like a sexy version of MySpace.
Oh my
Astro,
God.
good to see you. Hope you don't mind a little good-natured kidding. Glad you're here. He says all good. All right, perfect. Guys, any final thoughts on Crawl before we wrap this mofo up?
I want to mention one more thing that I was thrilled at, and that was near the beginning of the movie. There's some looters that are looting the gas station across the street, and this movie wasted absolutely no time in like taking out taking them all out eventually, but had alligators totally like come into the boat and take away the female looter who was in this trio of folks. I thought that was really great. I'm like, yeah, and I was like rooting for the alligators right off the bat. Like, oh my God, get them.
That whole scene was really funny because and I don't know if I loved it all in all, but it was fun. But just the fact that you have like this character who is like, she's down in the basement, she's signaling for help at this point with her light, and it's like, oh, there's hope. Oh, there's 3 people over there. And then they just get summarily dispatched. Like, it is like, it's not like a long drawn out thing. One of them doesn't make it to the house and joins her and then gets eaten later. One of them doesn't become her new love interest. It's just 3 people who are just like, oh, there's 3 people over there. Nope, they're lunch.
Yeah. And there was at least one, there was a couple of pretty damn good kills. And there's one kill in this movie that I really appreciated. And it was pretty gory. It was pretty gross, where the gators, like there were several gators attacked I think it was one of the looters in the water and like spun him around. And the way they did alligator attacks was very good too. I think it was very realistic, the way the alligators like, you know, spin their prey like that.
Do like the barrel thing.
And you know that because we watch a lot of Swamp People.
We do watch a lot of Swamp People, and we know alligator behavior like the back of our hand.
I know you watch a lot of Swamp People. Have you seen the show by that name?
Yeah.
I ran into some swamp ass people the other day. Does that count?
I don't want to hear that story.
It was at a gas station. Anyway.
Yeah, but that kill was pretty impressive when in the water, and it was shot from like a high angle, and one of the gators like basically grabs the guy's head and just like twists it off his body, and that's like people in the theater were like, "Ooh!" during that scene. So it was pretty effective.
Another thing I think this movie did effectively was the tension with the dog, who I affectionately was calling the alligator chicken nugget. You know, every time you see that dog, like, is it going to go downstairs? Is it going to go down the steps or not? Is it going to get eaten? Oh, it didn't get eaten. Phew. Oh my God. The dog is now like paddling in the water. Is it going to get eaten? It's going to get eaten. No, it didn't get eaten. So it did a good job of keeping you guessing. But then also, too, one thing I thought was fun was every single time the dog disappeared for a little while, and I started to think, hey, what happened to the dog? Is it still around? Boom. There's the dog. Like every single time, without fail, it did that. So thank you for keeping me aware of where the dog was.
So they didn't have to kill the dog. So points awarded for not killing the dog, whereas I took away points from Midsommar for killing the bear. Sorry. And then they also didn't have to have the dog do something heroic, right?
Right.
The dog didn't have to do something heroic to save the day.
I was expecting
a nice dog.
I was expecting the dog to like nudge the dresser or whatever was on top of that like hatch, like shift it sideways enough that she could get it open. But now the dog's just standing there like, what the fuck do you want me to do?
There is a website, if anyone's curious about these things, I think it's called like Does the Dog Die or .com or something like that. And it specifically lets you like find out if the dog survived the movie before you go watch it, if you're potentially traumatized by such a thing.
So Astro asked in the chat, is this movie worth going to see or should I wait? I wasn't planning on seeing this movie, but it sounds like you guys had a good time. Astro, I had fun with it. It was fine. It wasn't a super great movie, but I mean, it was a fun experience seeing alligators tearing people to shreds on a big giant screen with good sound. Maybe go with a friend, go in, expecting some good gore, and I think you'll be set up for success.
So many of these types of movies in this genre really fuck things up with, leaning on too many tropes or whatever. And this movie had its share of tropes. I'm not saying it was groundbreaking, but I think it sprinkled it played to its strengths. I thought it didn't overuse anything. And for that, I think it's a really solid, worthwhile movie to see. Whether you have to see it on the big screen or you can wait for it to come out and watch it kind of at night in your living room on a rainy night, might be cool with some friends. That's up to you, but I was surprised by how much I had fun with this movie.
Yeah, it's way better than it has any right to be.
Exactly. That's exactly what I said coming out of it.
Yeah.
You did.
And yeah, I would say go see it in the theaters. I think, the best way that we can encourage them to make more movies like this is to, throw money at the ones that they make that are good. But, not everyone has those resources and that time. And if you're one of those people, this one isn't going to like hurt your soul if you wait to watch it on rental later on. But if you can watch it in the big screen, I say do it.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our discussion of Crawl. We've talked about 2 movies this show. We'll maybe come back at you with some plugs next week, but we've talked about a lot. Guys, I want to give you an opportunity here real quick for anyone who maybe wants to chat movies with you between now and the next show. Jim, where can people find you online?
People can find me on Twitter at JJPOutWest. That's all one word, JJP Out West. Yeah, please hit me up on Twitter, or if you see me tweeting about a movie, feel free to comment and we can have a discussion right there. I love that. Also, I'm on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Well, where can people find you?
Look for me on Twitter. I'm at Whatever Cove. You can find me on Facebook. Just look for William Lindis. I'm also on Letterboxd. I post there quite a bit about the different movies that I've seen, including some mini reviews, as well as a movie project I'm doing right now where I watch a new LGBTQ film every week. So if you want to follow along with that, just find me on Letterboxd.
All right. And you can find me on Twitter at iBradPro, or look for me on Facebook under Brad Harris. Would love to chat movies with you guys, or anything else, really. I'm open. But if you do message on Facebook, please just let me know you came over from the podcast and you're not one of those Terminator-like intelligence ever increasing spam bots. They're getting really good these days, guys, and impersonating people. They've started stealing pictures of other human bears and using them now, both on Growler and on Facebook. It's kind of taken me by surprise. I mean, the bad language and the links are still a dead giveaway that it's not safe, but just let me know that you're a real person. I want to just say thank you to everyone who joined us in the live chat tonight. We had a lot of folks, a lot of names. It's always so great doing this show with you folks along for the ride. Also want to say a big hearty thank you and I love you to all of our listeners who access the show on digital tape delay through iTunes and Spotify. We know that's how most people access our show every week. And even though we don't get to interact with you live as we're recording, you're certainly in our hearts and minds as we're having our conversation. So thanks for being along with us for the ride, as well as you're actually taking a ride in your car or running on the elliptical or whatever. Do you run on the elliptical? I don't know if you would consider that running. Doesn't matter.
You ellip
moving.
On it.
You ellip. You're ellipping on the elliptical. There you go. Folks, we'll see you all next time. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.